So the tailgate opening has been cut out. What I found after I cut it open was that there was a little bit of foam here and there. There wasn't a whole lot, so I just kind of scraped it all out. The tailgate opening came out quite well. The issue that I ran into was there's a few places where I ended up kind of going through, so I'm going to have to end up doing some fiberglass work. This side seemed to have been the worst. What I also found is once I dry fit the tailgate in place, I realized I could take this edge down a little bit more, which I did, and there's kind of a natural groove right in here, which what I'm going to do is I have a piece of 1/8 inch thick 1 1/4 inch steel, which I have recessed in so that it ends up sitting flush. So I'm going to make a steel frame for that. I'm going to end up making a full steel frame that's going to fit all the way around. So I'm using the 1 1/4 for the bottom, but on the sides I have some 2 inch thick stock, which happens to be pretty much the width what this is going to be. So I'm going to run 2 inch material down the side, 1 1/4 inch material down the bottom. The 1 1/4 is recessed into the groove. Once I have it in, I will flip the tub over and then I will fiberglass in to make sure it's good and solid. In terms of the gaps that were at the top between the two pieces of fiberglass, what was in here, there was some foam in here, so I scraped the foam out, vacuumed it up. This is about 1 1/4 inch, so what I'm going to do is I am going to fill it in with pieces of plywood, because once this is all put together with the plywood in between, on the factory CJs it has the mounts for the tailgate hinges, so I'm going to use that to actually secure it, so it'll be a nice solid surface to secure the tailgate bracket. And on the bottom, once this has all been fiberglassed back in, there's a bracket here that's going to be for the tailgate as well, and it'll go through. I'll make myself a plate, probably a steel plate or an aluminum plate that I'll use to help secure it on the inside to make it good and solid. But after dry fitting, everything seems to be fitting out very well. It ends up almost being flush along the side of along the sides of the tub. This one's actually recessed a little bit further. The opening all the way across is exactly 36 inches. So that's what I have done, is I have exactly a 36 inch opening that goes all the way across. So the next step is to install my steel. So like I said, 36 inches is what I have. I recessed, there's a gap in here that I was able to recess below the edge of the fiberglass. After I cut the rough opening, what I did is I had a tailgate, put my tailgate in, and I made sure that, get it back in there, I made sure that it was very close to level on the top. Ideally I wanted it a little bit below, just so I have a little bit of a gap at the bottom once I finally mount the hinges. I also left myself a nice gap on each side to leave me room to have my 1/8 inch piece of steel up each of the sides. So I did all that, and once I fit the tailgate the first time, what I did is I found that I had to take this lip down a little bit more, which worked out well. I just used my angle grinder with an abrasive bit or abrasive blade on it, and it really actually cut it down very, very nicely. When it came to cutting out the tailgate, the bottom, most of the work was done with my angle grinder, and like this is an abrasive blade. This is a diamond one that you can use for concrete, but it worked really well when it came to cutting the fiberglass as well. You can use one of the abrasive, like those material abrasive blades. They work very well too. So I did all that. Once most of the work was done, I also then used the Dremel with just a little cutter head on it to help clean up the corners. I have lots of gaps that I need to fill in, but once I get my steel mounted, once I put my steel in and get my side steel in and kind of weld everything together, and that it's going to be nice and solid. I'm not going to be concerned about the tub flexing at all. And that seems to be one of the biggest concerns that people say about cutting the tailgate hole in. So by me reinforcing it with the steel, once I get this mounted, I'm going to run another piece as well on top. Like this is probably some, I'm thinking probably 3/8" square steel stock that I'm going to use as a stop. And I'll run that all the way around, and that'll give it even extra strength. So I'm not going to be concerned at all in terms of the strength and how this is going to work out. So my next step is to kind of get my steel roughed in and make sure I'm happy with how the steel fits. And after that, I'll do some more fiberglass work. So this is what I've done today. I've cut myself a couple of blocks. These are both 5/8. It ends up being about 1 1/4. Some of them I needed to kind of sand and finesse a little bit, so I just so they'd fit a little bit better. But those is, what I'll do is I will epoxy them into here. So that's my plan. So I did that for both sides. The other thing I did is I cut my side pieces, and I kind of even tried to follow the profile along the top of the tub. And these fit right in here. And the idea is that that'll be my sides. So it'll sit flush along this side. I had a little bit of a groove here when I was using the angle grinder, so I kind of just even used the angle grinder to help align the piece. So I put that right in. So I did that on both sides. So there's my other one. Pretty much the same. It fits in the slot, lays in place. And then once that was in, I cut my 1 1/4" piece to length. And you can still see all my gaps and grooves, but once this thing goes in, it fills in nicely. So I'm going to epoxy that in. I'll epoxy these things in. I'm going to probably put a couple more screw holes and see what I can do to actually screw it and run it through. Once this is mounted, I'm going to go underneath and I'm going to fill in with fiberglass mesh to fill in all the gaps and stuff that I had along what you can see when you look at it. So I'll clean all that up. I'll have to clean in this corner. So there's a fair bit of fiberglass meshing and fiberglass resin work that I have to do, but I'll do all that and get that done. And after that, we'll see how it looks. Oh, also the last thing too is once this is glued in, it's sitting a little bit lower than the edge of the fiberglass tub. So once this has been epoxied in and set, I'll take a grinder, run that down here and just smooth this all out so that the steel is flush with the edge of the tub. And that'll give me a little extra room for when I actually put the tailgate on. So I did fit the tailgate, and it fits really well. I'm very happy with it. I have a bit of I probably have about 1/8 inch gap at the bottom, which is what I was hoping for. And it'll give me a nice even top, and I got lots of space on the sides for my sides. So I'm thinking it looks really, really good. I'm very pleased with how it's turned out so far. So here's the result. I mounted the pieces. You can see the steel piece running down the side, and then the one that runs along the bottom, and then the other piece that runs up the side. So for now, what I've done is I've used a screw because I put in the chunks of plywood that I'd cut. I covered them in fiberglass resin, stuck them in, let them sit overnight, and then the next morning or the next day is when I mounted these. So I kind of covered this side of that piece with the fiberglass resin and then stuck it. I used clamps to actually help hold it all in place. So everything was kind of put together using fiberglass resin and clamps. It sat overnight. Everything looks solid. Since then I've drilled some holes and recessed a few screws. Well, that one I haven't put the screw in yet, but I've recessed a few screws to help hold it in place. And now I'm going to start reinforcing the fiberglass from underneath to kind of build it all back up from a lot of the stuff that was cut out and removed. So that's really the tailgate opening. I dry fitted the tailgate. It fits really, really well. I'm very happy with the result. So really now it's just time for me to start doing the fiberglass and get her looking much better. When I cut and mounted the horizontal steel pieces, I ran it, on purpose I ran it past the bottom of this horizontal piece So what it does is it sticks out underneath. So when I go underneath, which I'm going to try doing right now, when I go underneath, you can see the edge of the steel piece here, and I can see the edge of the horizontal piece, so I'm going to run a weld right in here just to reinforce it. I've done that on both sides, so I'll weld the two pieces together, and that'll give it a little bit extra strength. The other thing I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start fiberglassing the seam from underneath to reinforce where I cut it and mounted the steel piece, the horizontal steel piece in, so hopefully that'll help it out too. So here's my progress so far. What I've done is I have come and I've fiberglassed all the inside inside of the wheel well against the piece of steel. I have fiberglassed all underneath this metal piece that I put in, and I have fiberglassed all along this side, and it's actually gone really well. So then what I did is I've recently mounted a piece of 3/8 inch steel, 3/8 inch square steel. I mounted it 3/4 of an inch back from this edge, and that's the stop for the tailgate. So the weather stripping works really well along here. There isn't a strip along the bottom, it's just on the two sides. The other thing I found is this, by having this strip, what it does is it on the tailgate it has the little latch that kind of comes down and locks, and this works perfectly. It works well exactly where I need it to be, so I can actually use that strip to help lock the tailgate in place. My plan now is to flip it over, and I'm going to do some more fiberglassing. But in terms of the fiberglassing, when I was doing this, I found it was very helpful for me to go inside the wheel well. Once I was in the wheel well, I could get in there and I could weld, I could fiberglass and put the mesh and everything in, and it worked really well for me.